Good morning. I'm harleysch from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for October 10th, 2024. In the swirl of events, there were a number of things that happened in the last 24 to 48 hours, which are absolutely essential to take into consideration when thinking about what are the options in front of us. I want to review some of these highlights and then give you some background and to remind you that we do have a chance to intervene if we as citizens take responsibility for moving the country that we live in the right direction. So just in terms of these developments, we're looking at two explosive fronts. War is going on in Ukraine and now in Southwest Asia. First, we had yesterday the report that Biden had canceled his trip to Germany, where he was going to participate in the Ramstein Ukrainian Defense Contact Group, which would have been a scene of argumentation for extending more weapons to Ukraine. The decision was made to cancel, as the White House said, so Biden could preside over the relief efforts for the hurricane damages from two hurricanes in the United States. But there may be other reasons. We don't know exactly why, but one of those reasons may have been to postpone the moment of decision. Now, second point, Zelenskyy is going to charge ahead anyway. It was announced today that he's going to have meetings in Italy, France, and the United Kingdom. In one day, he's taking his traveling roadshow on the road and aggressively pursuing money and arms at a point at which Ukraine is barely hanging on. His message, according to BBC, is going to be, if you don't help us to fight Russia, then you'll have to fight Russia yourself later on. Now, the third situation is in Southwest Asia, where Netanyahu gave an extraordinary address yesterday to the Lebanese people, where he basically said, surrender or we'll obliterate you. And he then went and spoke to major U.S. Jewish organizations and delivered a message that you have to support us. We're fighting global anti-Semitism, and it's up to the United States to follow through on the commitment to defend Israel. Now, at the same time, as it looks as though Israel's trying to decide what to do in terms of striking Iran, Putin announced that he's going to be meeting with Iran's President Pezeshkian on Friday. They were going to meet on October 22nd, but they moved the meeting up, possibly to reach an agreement to sign a strategic and defense agreement, which would be a warning to Israel that an attack on Iran might bring in Russian support for Iran. So what you can see just from these 4 points is that this is a moment of extreme tension. And it's clear that wars take on a life of their own once they're launched. Either you move aggressively with a peace agreement, with negotiations, with diplomacy, or you risk the danger of constant escalation. Now, it's clear that the Ukraine situation is driven by the realization that Ukraine cannot defeat Russia. And yet the drumbeat for escalation continues. The postponement to grant the right to Ukraine to use U.S. and British long-range missiles to strike Russia is just that, a postponement, kicking the can down the road. It doesn't mean that they don't intend to do that. And this is where the question can't be left to the politicians. Now, in addition to the Ramstein meeting that was canceled, there was supposed to be a meeting of heads of state, including Biden, Schultz, Macron, and Starmer. And apparently that also was canceled. Whether they'll do a Zoom meeting or something, I have no knowledge of that. Now, in commenting on this confluence of events, Helga Zepp-LaRouche quoted General Harold Kuyat, the former German Bundeswehr chief of staff, and she said that he warned about 1 year ago that NATO will come to the point of decision of either having a negotiated solution, one which will be accepted by Russia, or go for an escalation. And Helga said, I'm afraid that we are sitting in the immediate vicinity of a decision to escalate, which could lead, in the worst case, to a global nuclear war. And that is increasingly the consensus of opinion of many military analysts and others, that unless this is resolved in some favorable way that takes into consideration the security concerns of all sides, then we are headed for escalation, and escalation ultimately could be a nuclear war. Now, also yesterday, and by the way, the next chance for this discussion will be the NATO defense ministers meeting on October 17th in Brussels. Now, it was reported that Biden and Netanyahu spoke yesterday for the first time in a while. There's all these rumors about how tense their discussions have been, how Biden is pushing Netanyahu, Netanyahu's pushing back. A lot of this is for public consumption. But the question that does remain is, will Israel carry out a retaliatory strike in response to Iran's October 1st missile barrage against Israel? And if so, what will that strike be? And will there be the U.S. on standby in case the strike gets out of control? Now, the problem is that what Netanyahu has warned he's going to do is spread the destruction that he's unleashed on Gaza into Lebanon, into Iran, and possibly Syria as well. Now, yesterday, there was an interview with Colonel Larry Wilkerson, who is the former deputy to Colin Powell when Powell was Secretary of State and presided over the Iraq War. Wilkerson was asked, will the U.S. join Israel against Iran? And he said, quote, if we intervene, we may see a 10-year war that we don't win, unquote. And he said there's a huge debate going on in U.S. military circles and diplomatic circles and in the White House as to what the response should be. Now remember, Wilkerson was there when the decision was made to use fake intelligence to go to war against Iraq. Now, it also was reported yesterday that from October 7th to September 30th, that is encompassing the 1 year of the fighting in Gaza, the U.S. spent $22.76 billion to support Israel's military operations. Almost $23 billion. And now we're seeing the fact that the United States is having trouble drumming up the money to provide life-saving humanitarian aid to residents of southeastern states hit by deadly hurricanes. There shouldn't be a choice to be made between, do we fund wars and genocide or saving people's lives? It's a false choice. The solution is no to wars and invest in humanitarian aid and, more importantly, long-term physical economic development, which helps to protect us from natural disasters and at the same time provide meaningful assistance to people who need it. Now, in that context, we have a summit coming up October 22nd to 24th in Kazan, Russia, of the BRICS nations. And they're going to be discussing the potential for an alternative system to the dollar to protect countries from the weaponization of the dollar that's been going on. In that context, I want to call your attention to a very interesting interview done by my associate Michael Billington with Dr. Mahathir Muhamad, the former Prime Minister of Malaysia and a senior statesman. Just listen to the words of Mahathir, and I'm appending a link to the video in the description section today. Mahathir said, quote, it would seem that the Western alliance needs an enemy all the time. The attitude is that the war against Russia would solve this problem. But war will not solve the problem. They're going to lead to bigger wars, to a third world war. That's what I fear. He said the solution is that a non-aligned policy must replace the East versus West paradigm. The world, he said, is still divided into two confronting blocs, the East and the West. And other countries fear that they're being pressured to join one or the other. But these countries do not want to be involved in a confrontation between the US and China and Russia. That is why there is a need, once again, to think about non-alignment which was proposed by Sukarno, referring to the Indonesian president, who was one of the founders of the non-aligned movement in 1955. And Mahathir said, "We want to see a stable world where we can grow through trade with the whole world. We don't need any blocks, east or west. We need a world where everybody is equal." And the BRICS summit is taking that up as a policy question for increasing numbers of countries. There are now as many as 40 countries wishing to join the BRICS. Now, tomorrow is Friday. I'll be taking your questions. You can send them to me at harleysch@gmail.com. I'm going to be appending a link to the Helga Zepp-LaRouche dialogue I had yesterday with her and the interview with Mahathir. And don't forget, tomorrow is the International Peace Coalition Zoom call at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So I'll see you then.